So we are going to solve by completing the square. When we complete the square, we want the x terms on one side of the equation and the constant on the other, so that's good. We're all set up like that. We also just want 1x squared, not 6x squared, so let's divide both sides of the equation by 6. So we have 6x squared divided by 6, which is just x squared. 3 divided by 6 is 1/2. And then we have 3 divided by 6 again. So completing the square is filling in right here the number that lets us factor the left side of the equation as a binomial squared. To figure out that number, we always follow the same steps. We take the x coefficient, which is 1/2 in this case, and whatever the x coefficient is, you multiply that times 1/2. So this time we have 1/2 times 1/2, and then you square it. So it's always 1/2 times the x coefficient squared. So that would be 1/4 squared. So 1/4 squared would be 1/16. So 1/16 is the number that we want to fill in to make a trinomial. So we have x squared plus 1/2 x plus 1/16. Now if you add a 16th on the left side of the equation, you have to add a 16th on the right side of the equation to keep the equation true. But now that the reason we picked the 1/16 is the left side of the equation should factor perfectly. So let's go ahead and factor here. It should factor as a binomial times itself. So 1/16 times 1/16 is rather, we want 1/4 times 1/4 to give us the 1/16. So this number that we squared is the number that gets filled into our binomials here. So x plus 1/4 times x plus 1/4 equals x squared plus 1/2 x plus 1/16. We still have to add the 1/2 and the 1/16. So 1/2 is 8/16. I just multiplied 1/2 by 8/8. So we have x plus 1/4 squared on the left. And on the right we have 9/16. So we now have completed the square. We got the squaring from right next to the x up here, and we moved it up to here. And we kept the equation true the whole time. All we did, whenever we did something to one side of the equation, we did it to the other. Okay, so now the reason we do that is now we can take the square root of both sides of the equation. So let's go ahead and do that. On the number side, we put a plus or minus. Whenever we introduce the square root symbol to solve, we put a plus or minus. So the square root of x plus a 4 squared is x plus a 4th. The square root of 9/16 is 3/4. So we have plus or minus 3/4. We have two answers here. X is either, well, let's go ahead and subtract 1/4 from both sides of the equation. So x is plus or minus 3/4 minus a 4th. So that would mean x is positive 3/4 minus a 4th, or x is negative 3/4 minus a 4th. So positive 3/4 minus a 4th is 2/4, and 2/4 would be 1/2. Negative 3/4 minus a 4th is negative 4/4, which is -1. You can check your answers if you like in the original problem. When you get rational answers like this, when there's no roots, that means that we could have in fact factored to solve. But this is good practice completing the square.